If you walk out of your fantasy draft without one of these 5 sleeper wide receivers, you're basically handing your league mates free wins. You're either going to be in on them now or getting torched by them all season long. So buckle up, here are the 5 sleeper wideouts you need to draft before it's too late. Starting with Packers rookie wide receiver Matthew Golden, who could be this year's Brian Thomas Jr. Now, I'm not saying Matthew Golden is the prospect that Brian Thomas Jr. was. I'm just more comparing to how he was in fantasy. Remember last year, Brian Thomas Jr. kind of being forgotten as far as the rookie wide receivers go. This year, we're seeing rookie wide receivers like McMillan and Travis Hunter being drafted much higher than Matthew Golden. Now, a lot of fantasy players hear Packers wide receiver and they just think complete headache, no clear wide receiver one. And yeah, they're right. But I think we're going to see something different this year. We're already hearing like it sounds like Matthew Golden is going to be out there most of the time in 2 wide receiver sets with Romeo Doubs. And I really believe head coach Matt LaFleur is going to use this guy as a weapon in the slot, off the line of scrimmage, getting this guy in motion. And he has absolute elite vertical speed. This guy ran a 4.29 40 and has a 91st percentile speed score. But unlike many of these speed wide receivers that came before him who couldn't do things that wide receivers need to do, like catch the football and run routes, Matthew Golden can absolutely do both. Because according to Matt Harmon of Reception Perception, he said this about Golden: one area where I think Golden distinguishes himself from the run-of-the-mill wide receiver 2 is what he does in tight coverage. Golden had truly special flashes when winning at the catch point. He saw a contested target on 22.6% of his sampled looks and won 83.3% of those chances. Golden tracks the ball exceptionally well and gets positioned subtly in contested situations. It's fair to say he stunned me here. And it's not just contested catches, he can actually run routes. While he isn't an above average route runner on the entire route tree, he dominates the vertical routes while also being above average or better in the dig, out, and slant routes. And I know I mentioned Brian Thomas Jr. at the beginning here, but you know who I really think we're going to see him style like? It's Tyreek Hill. Now again, I'm not comparing him to Tyreek Hill. I'm not saying he's going to be as good as Tyreek Hill, but think about how Tyreek Hill was used in that Dolphins offense the first couple of years before he kind of became dust last year. What would Mike McDaniel do? He would get this guy in motion, get him that head start, and then have him run vertical past the safeties. But what's really great about Golden here is when defenses start to realize this and they start to play those too high, softer defenses against them, not letting them beat them deep, he's got the ability to break off his routes and run that dig route, which is going to be great for his fantasy value because those horizontal breaking dig routes are some of the most valuable for fantasy football. I really think Golden has as much upside as any rookie wide receiver in this class this year, yet he's being slept on in fantasy drafts, going outside the top 100 picks in your fantasy football drafts. Don't let Matthew Golden fall past you. I really think he has league-breaking upside this year and is going to be one of those wide receivers, kind of like Brian Thomas Jr. last year, we look back on and say, how did we let him fall that far in fantasy drafts? Now, when the Texans first signed Christian Kirk, I thought that was a great landing spot for him. And then in the NFL draft, they drafted not 1, but 2 rookie wide receivers, including a slot rookie wide receiver. And I got a little nervous for Christian Kirk. But it sounds like Christian Kirk has that slot role solidified in this Houston offense. And I am all the way back in on Christian Kirk as a late round sleeper. He's likely going to slot into that Stephon Diggs role from last year. Last year, Diggs played from the slot on 45% of his snaps, and he was pretty productive prior to his ACL injury, averaging over 15 points per game. And it's not like Kirk is a bad player here. He's just missed too many games over his career. But remember, just a few years ago, he had over 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns while averaging over 14 points per game the last time we saw him in a healthy season. And over the last 2 years, the Texans are 4th in expected fantasy points for wide receivers, so there's plenty here to go around for Nico Collins, Christian Kirk, and the others. And when you look at this offense right now, the running game might be an absolute shambles. Joe Mixon dealing with a foot injury that is supposed to keep him out an extended amount of time. Nick Chubb has been decimated by injuries recently, and last year looked nothing like the guy we saw in his prime. And the Texans have ranked 12th and 11th in pass plays per game over the last 2 years, so this is already a high-volume passing attack that could throw the ball even more in 2025. If Christian Kirk can stay healthy this year, there's no reason he can't match or even exceed the 2022 numbers he put up in Jacksonville, and he's basically free in your fantasy drafts right now. Don't let one of your league mates get Christian Kirk in your fantasy drafts. And if you haven't heard yet, Keenan Allen is once again a Charger. Yes, after one terrible year with the Bears, he was like, forget this, I'm going back to LA. And while this hasn't lessened my enthusiasm for Ladd, because Ladd is a stud player, it certainly got me much more interested in Keenan. No, Keenan Allen isn't going to be a wide receiver 1 ever again at this point of his career, but he did show last year, even in a terrible Bears offense, he can be productive. He averaged 12.4 points per game and was the wide receiver 31 despite his terrible circumstances. And the last time we saw him in a real offense, which was 2023 with the Chargers, he was still putting up great numbers. He was third in expected fantasy points per game for wide receivers and 11th in yards per route run. Now, we can't expect those numbers again from Keenan Allen. He's a couple years older here, but I don't think he's anywhere close to complete dust either. And despite what felt like more of a safe player last year, he actually did give us a lot of spike weeks. He had over 17 half PPR points per game in 33% of his games last year. So he gives us a pretty nice floor here with upside. And when you look at the Chargers pass catchers behind Ladd, it's not great. Quentin Johnston still struggling with drops in training camp. Trey Harris, the guy we thought was going to be the rookie to have here, has been outplayed by 5th round rookie wide receiver Keandre Lambert-Smith. And if the Chargers really believed in these guys, would they go out and sign 33-year-old Keenan Allen? I don't think so. But because he didn't have a team for most of the offseason and because he didn't do a whole lot last year, his ADP really hasn't shot up. This is still a guy you can get in the double-digit rounds of your fantasy drafts. When I'm on the clock in those double-digit rounds and I see Keenan Allen, I have to get this guy on my roster. I could not handle it if I let somebody else get Keenan Allen this year and he puts up a top 24 season in somebody else's lineup, not mine. Now, last year, Cedric Tillman was one of my favorite late-round wide receiver sleepers, and it looked like it was going to come through until he had that unfortunate Week 12 concussion that ended his season. But all reports out of camp are he's good to go, he looks good, and he's obviously going to be the number 2 wide receiver there with Jerry Jeudy. But the interesting thing to me about Tillman here is he profiles very similarly to another big outside wide receiver who struggled for 2 years, finally got a quarterback upgrade, and became a stud. I'm talking about Nico Collins. Now, obviously, C.J. Stroud is what helped propel Nico Collins to that next level, but maybe there's a C.J. Stroud waiting in the wings in Cleveland because Shedeur Sanders in that first preseason game absolutely balled out. We know this guy can play football. For whatever reason, the Browns don't think so, but he showed us. I know it's preseason, but man, to put up those numbers in a preseason game, you got to be feeling good about him. But even if it's not Shedeur, all reports sound like it's going to be Joe Flacco to start the season, and at least we've seen Joe Flacco be capable for fantasy wide receivers. You look at it last year after the Browns traded away Amari Cooper in Week 7 and Tillman became the full-time X-wide receiver, he played close to or above 90% of the snaps in every game until the game he got injured in. Not to mention, he averaged over 18.6 points per game in those games. Now it's easy to say, well, that was with Jameis Winston, and you're right, it was. But again, we could be looking at Joe Flacco. We could be looking at Shedeur Sanders. Maybe they're not as good as Jameis Winston as far as for fantasy, but they're good enough. And Tillman, like Nico a couple years ago, is entering that year 3 breakout year for wide receivers. He should play well over 90% of the snaps in this offense in that X wide receiver role. And you know what's really interesting about this situation? He goes over 100 picks later than Jerry Jeudy. And if, like me, you're old enough to remember Jerry Jeudy back on the Broncos when they signed Russell Wilson, that year there was an outside, big-bodied, talented X-wide receiver that was going 90 picks after Jerry Jeudy on the same team. And I said, this is insane that Courtland Sutton is going 90 picks after Jerry Jeudy. And that year, if you drafted Courtland Sutton and avoided Jerry Jeudy, you were very happy. And you know what? I think it might happen again this year. I've been avoiding Jerry Jeudy and just drafting Cedric Tillman. Give me the 100-plus pick discount here. I think Cedric Tillman can be every bit as good or better than Jerry Jeudy in 2025. And then I got to finish up by saying I definitely like Stephon Diggs this year, but I'm also coming around on Demario Pop Douglas for the New England Patriots. All reports from camp are that he looks fantastic and is arguably the best wide receiver in camp. Now, of course, we got to take this with a little bit of grain of salt. And, of course, over his first 2 years, he's really done hardly nothing. But you look at it last year in the 5 games where he played over 70% of the snaps. Yes, he only played over 70% of the snaps in 5 games. He scored double-digit fantasy points in all but one of those games. And he went over 14 fantasy points in 2 of them. So if he was so good, why was he hardly on the field last year? Well, because under offensive coordinator Alex Van Pelt in 2024, the Patriots had the 25th fewest times where they had 3 wide receivers on the field across the entire NFL. But now he gets Josh McDaniels, and while they may not run a ton of 3 wide receiver sets, he loves his slot wide receivers. Even in 2 wide receiver sets, we are going to see Demario Douglas out there in the slot, probably with Stephon Diggs. And with Drake May potentially taking a step forward this year, we could be seeing more fantasy points from Demario Douglas as well. And it's not like this guy can't get open. According to Player Profiler last year, he was 9th in route win rate and 2nd in route win rate versus man coverage. And now, once again, he's entering year 3, that prime year for wide receivers. He should be on the field 70, 80% of the snaps in this Josh McDaniels offense that likes to feature the slot wide receiver with Drake May. I think Pop Douglas is going to be an absolute steal in your fantasy drafts. Don't let your league mates get him. And don't go into your fantasy drafts without watching all the amazing content we have to help you dominate your draft. You can find it on our 2025 playlist right here.